Good day, everyone. So excited that you could be here with us virtually at DevNet Create 2021. I hope that you're having a wonderful experience. I'm here today to talk to you a little bit about some of the work we've done within Cisco's customer experience org to improve the stability and performance of our SecureX orchestration workflows and ensure that they're fit for production scale. I'll be sharing some of those best practices with you here today. A little bit about me. I lead digital transformation for Cisco managed services within Cisco CX. I get to work with an amazing team on automation and transformation initiatives that help us deliver the best industry experience to our partners and customers. So, on the agenda for today, we're going to spend the first few seconds to talk about a scenario and why good development practices are important to ensure a good user experience. And then we're going to get into what you really came here for. We're going to look at possible implementations for three concepts today. First, how do you log and trace workflow progress? Second, how do you handle errors or exceptions when they occur? And third, how do you do continuous integration and deployment with SecureX orchestration workflows? And finally, we're going to close out with some key takeaways. All of what I'm going to talk to you about is on our GitHub org. You can grab the link from the screen here. There's a specific repo for DevNet Create attendees with examples that you can check out, along with other useful open source content for SecureX orchestration. So let's look at a scenario to help you relate to everything else we're going to talk about today. You have your happy users. They come into your IT service management system, say ServiceNow, to raise a service request to order an item from your company's e-catalog. And you have a workflow built within SecureX orchestration that takes the input from ServiceNow and then does three simple things to fulfill the order. It makes an API request to a third system, parses the response returned from the API, and sends the parsed response as output. This output is then returned to ServiceNow and communicated back to the user. This is all great, right? But you've got to be prepared for the worst. What if the API server goes down? What if parsing fails because we got a bad response back from the API server? And what if you're making an attempt to fix something in your workflow and you break something else? Now imagine you've got hundreds of these requests coming in at scale and your workflow's falling apart. You have no visibility into what's happening or how to fix it. Your happy users are no longer happy. When you're writing code in, say, Python or Go or Java, you're used to having things like a stack trace, right? You've got a bunch of IDE extensions out there to lint your code, and you likely have a CICD release pipeline to ship your code or builds from your dev stage environments to your production environment. But unlike mature programming languages, not a whole lot of such best practices exist out there for how to do low to no code well at scale. Because, well, there's likely no code to build or test or ship, right? The platform abstracts everything. So if you're using SecureX orchestration for user-facing applications like this one at scale, you should consider the things that I'm about to show you. All right, so let's get into some of the fun stuff now, and we'll kick it off by talking about logging. We call our logging framework breadcrumbs. So what breadcrumbs allows you to do is, as your workflows run, you drop some breadcrumbs along the way. So when something in your workflow fails, you could potentially trace back to the last successful breadcrumb and have the workflow pick up where it left off, or quickly isolate the first failed breadcrumb and troubleshoot from there on. What you see on the right here is the workflow from our scenario where we're making an API request, parsing the response, and setting an output variable. And once I have breadcrumbs imported to my SXO org, all I've got to do to use breadcrumbs is to really just search for the breadcrumbs logging block workflow and strategically place it in my workflow here. So in this case, we're going to start by putting it right after my API request. You're going to want to pass some information in here to the logging block, like an instance ID, a friendly but unique name you can search or trace with across the thousands of runs you could potentially have for this workflow, and specify what the log message should include. So in my case here, I want to see the HTTP response code logged. So if I get 4xx or 5xx error codes back, I know that something's up with the third-party API. So similarly, I'm going to add logging blocks after the other two activities as well, as you can see here. And when this workflow now runs, each logging block is going to capture the progress of the activity preceding it in a global table variable within SXO with all the information I passed to it. Now, you could just stop here and consume what you want from the table, or you could use breadcrumbs tracing workflow, give it a fuzzy search term, that friendly ID we passed to the logging block, you could use that here. And when you hit run, you would get a nicely formatted JSON with your workflow logs that you can now consume however you want. Looking at this, I know that my API failed with a 404, which then caused the subsequent activities to fail as well. Now imagine if you had thousands of runs failing and wanted to quickly trace the origin of the failure, this is where breadcrumbs can help. All right, so on to error handling and alerting. Let me introduce you to Oversight, our error handling framework. Oversight will monitor your most important workflows and watch them for errors, so you don't have to. You could have known errors in here. You could have catch-all exceptions. To your right again is our scenario workflow. And this workflow is super critical to our business, right? So I've put this workflows ID in the oversight table. Now oversight will run on a schedule that you define to go out and look for errors in the runs of this workflow and others that it has to monitor. And what you can also have is an error handler workflow that oversight automatically kicks off when it sees an error. So for example, when our mission critical workflow here runs into any error, I want oversight to kick off a handler workflow, which sends me a text on WebEx to go figure out what happened before we begin getting complaints from our users, right? Super simple, but super useful at scale. And now it's time for some CI/CD action. I'm going to show you how we handle workflow releases, going from our development SecureX org to our production org. By this point, you're all familiar with our scenario workflow. And to begin with, I'm just going to commit this to our development branch on GitHub. Nothing too fancy, just going to give my commit a description and hit commit. And that should take a few seconds to get done. Now, on our dev branch, we have a couple of really cool GitHub actions that you should all check out. And those are the ones that we're going to use as examples here. Of course, you can extend your CI pipeline with any number of actions, but we're going to stick with these two for today. We have Autodoc that lets you auto-generate a README file from content you put in your workflow. And we have Analyzer that links your workflow against Cisco best practices. So what you see on your right now is the development branch that we just committed our workflow to. As you can see, we have a README that's generated from the content I put in the workflow description already. That right there is Autodoc in action. And if we go to issues here, you'll see that Analyzer has automatically created one for me that shows me all the checks that ran, how many passed, how many failed, how many warnings I have, and I can now work on these items so I know I'm pushing good quality code to production. All right, so now our workflow is in the dev branch. I'm going to go ahead and create a pull request to move it to the production branch. So let's go ahead and do that. Just type in some content here. And I can see that the two actions in my CI pipeline ran and were successful. So I know that everything's good. Let's go ahead and create that PR. And now as I've done that, someone else from the team comes in, sees that there's an open pull request, peer reviews what I've done. Again, they also get to see the checks that ran and were successful. And so they determine that this is good to push to production. So they go ahead and merge my PR into the production branch. Pretty standard GitHub CI workflow so far. Okay, here we go. And now now as new content is committed to our production branch, we have another GitHub action that's running on the production branch that sends us an email with some commit context in there. And we have a workflow on our production org that's monitoring this mailbox and triggers off of this email and attempts to pull this new content down from the production branch and into our production SecureX orchestration org. So this way you can push changes to your workflows more gracefully from dev to prod, and run them through tests to ensure that only code that passes stipulated checks makes it to your production org. Finally, I want to leave you with some closing thoughts. Low to no code does not imply no coders. Workflow authors with software programming knowledge can make low to no code platforms more powerful for everyone. SecureX Orchestration is a great example of this. We looked at breadcrumbs, oversight, and how you might do CICD with GitHub Actions to give you the confidence to have your workflows operate at production scale. Is what we talked about the only way to accomplish these things? Absolutely not. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on what works for you, and how you would do things differently. Everything we talked about and much more is also available in our GitHub organization. It's also a good place to get in touch with us if you'd like to. And with that, I want to thank you for taking the time to join me and the rest of the team at this year's Create, and enjoy the rest of the event.